So welcome everyone. My name is Michael Chrostowski. I am AgeWell's Business Development and Partnerships Lead, and I'm also involved with envisAGE. Just to get started, we'd like to get a sense of who is in attendance today. So we put up a little poll that we'd love for you to answer, and that way we'll have an understanding of who's participating today. So it should have popped up, as I see people are already answering it, and we'll give you a little bit of time to do that. A few more seconds in case anyone else is providing an answer. Okay, thank you for your responses. It's very helpful for us, so we have a sense of who we have here with us today. So welcome, and we're really looking forward to having you join this ecosystem and take part in this call. So, as I was saying, I'm Michael Chrostowski. I lead business development and partnerships for AgeWell, which is one of the co-leads for this initiative. And welcome to our webinar for envisAGE's first call for innovations. Today, we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. There will be 2 periods of Q&A, but feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentation, and then we'll look to get answers for you during that time. Also, I'd just like to remind you that there is a chat feature, but we do prefer questions to go in the Q&A spot. However, you do have access to the chat feature as well. So before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the land on which I'm located today. So for thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Great Mississauga Nations, who are signatories of the Williams Treaty. These communities include the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, First Nations of Alderville, Beausoleil, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, the Chippewas of Georgina Island, and Rama. You may live and work in different territories, so we encourage you to reflect on the land on which you're located and to consider your relationship to the land and to the people who are traditional keepers of that land. And to begin, I'd like to acknowledge that envisAGE is supported by the Government of Canada through Stream 5 of the Strategic Innovation Fund. So many of you are familiar with envisAGE, but for those who are not, envisAGE is a pan-Canadian initiative, and our mission is to catalyze Canada's age tech ecosystem, and we'll do that by supporting innovators to grow and scale their enterprises and deliver technology solutions that can help older adults maintain a better quality of life. And this initiative is co-led by MedTech Plus and AgeWell. So we have some key objectives for envisAGE, and this includes the acceleration of SMEs, and we'll do that through up to 100 collaborative projects over a period of 5 years. And we want to make sure that they're better positioned in this sector in Canada and beyond. We, of course, are going to be engaging older adults to make sure that those solutions that are developed are able to improve quality of life for them and that they're also adopted and relevant. We want to engage organizations across different spaces to make sure that the technologies that are provided are going to be serving older adults and that they can be scaled up. And so the projects that we put forward are kind of a stepping stone or a path towards better scale and success for the solutions and for those who benefit from them. And of course, we have an objective to achieve progress in economic development and investment. And so we'll be looking to provide investment opportunities to ensure growth for all of the SMEs and startups that participate. I won't spend too much time here, but just to let you know, this is a program that's funded through a $47 million fund, but we will also be leveraging funding from various sources, provincial and private investment, to make this ecosystem really grow and achieve all of those objectives that I mentioned. We will have SMEs, likely over up to 100 of them. We'll have community labs participating in projects, and these are really the partners that help us get those technologies into the hands of older adults, as they are the ones who are currently serving older adults. And we will have academic research and health institutions that we call beachheads that are going to be conducting evaluation of the projects, including the implementation measurement and the solutions that have been implemented through our projects. And then finally, we have innovation hubs that are really have a national scope. They have specific areas of expertise, and they're going to undertake key projects that will support knowledge transfer and addressing barriers, as well as sharing information on best practices regarding the integration and scaling of technologies in this space. They can also participate in the projects that you'll be hearing about today. So let's get right to the call for innovations. So today we'll be talking about that and a lot of different aspects of it. But to begin with, what are we doing through this call? We're trying to create these collaborative projects, and the main partners in these collaborative projects will be the SME, or small to medium enterprise, which I'll get into a little bit more in terms of eligibility, but it's essentially a Canadian SME, a community lab, which is this organization that will get the technology into the hands of older adults or caregivers. And this can be a range of types of organizations. So whether it's someone in senior living, home care, a community-based organization, or really anyone that's acting to serve older adults right now and can benefit from technology in that way. And then I already mentioned the beachheads and the innovation hubs, which have important roles to play. They will certainly be a part of these collaborative projects, but definitely at the letter of intent phase, there's a focus on the SME and the community lab, as these are the organizations that are able to submit a letter of intent, and they can do so individually or jointly. So if a community lab or SME already know each other or working together, they're able to complete a joint submission of that letter of intent. So for this call, we have 5 priority themes. You can learn more about them on the website. You can also learn more about them on the AgeWell website, as these are derived from the 8 challenge areas that AgeWell has identified. And for this call, this includes autonomy and independence, cognitive health and dementia, healthy lifestyles and wellness, staying connected, and supportive homes and communities. So it'll be helpful for you to understand where your innovation or where your need falls within these priority themes. Sometimes it may be more than one, and you will be able to indicate that in your letter of intent. So when we talk about age tech and the technologies we're looking at, we consider age tech to be a term that references technologies that are meant to enhance the lives of older adults and their caregivers, as well as the organizations that serve them. And this includes the types of technologies you see listed here on this page. So it's not that age tech is a term that's taking ownership of a particular segment. It overlaps with a lot of these that you see here, whether it's assistive devices, telehealth, digital health, and all kinds of other solutions. If you do end up having questions about whether your technology falls into age tech, even though it's going to be there to help older adults or caregivers, you can certainly reach out to envisAGE to get confirmation on that. So can I apply? So as we mentioned before, at this stage of the letter of intent, there will be a couple of scenarios where someone can apply. This can be a Canadian small to medium enterprise, which has a mature technology at a technology readiness level of 7 through 9, or it can be a community lab, so any of those types of organizations I was referencing that serve older adults or work with caregivers of older adults, or there can be a joint submission. So we're going to go through a little bit later the letter of intent application, and I'll talk a bit more about the solo versus joint application, but this is basically who can apply. And certainly it'll be very useful for you to be familiar with the guide for applicants. And if you look through that, you can see the eligibility criteria, and both for a lead applicant or for any of the collaborators on the application. So when I refer to the lead applicant, obviously if there's a solo application, that's the lead applicant. If there's a joint application, then there's just a decision between the small to medium enterprise or the community lab on who the lead applicant is. But regardless, you can find information about their eligibility. I won't go through all of it, other than to say that some of the important pieces are that they're Canadian, that they have most of their operations and jobs active in Canada, and that you're able to demonstrate that you can participate in this type of program. You have the financial and resource capacity to participate in what is a reimbursement program. And when it comes to the community labs, there's additionally eligibility around being willing to participate and understanding that you're here to look at these technologies, help to demonstrate them, and you have an openness to potentially continue working with that small to medium enterprise so that they can scale and succeed beyond the project. For the SME, there's some other criteria you should look at regarding making sure you have ownership of the IP, and that any kinds of regulatory requirements you may have placed on you in order to actually demonstrate your technology are all taken care of and addressed for the projects. So just again, to highlight the technology itself, we mentioned what age tech is, but we're looking at technology that's kind of moved further along, is more mature, and is at a technology readiness level of at least 7. So there would have already been some validation done before you're submitting for one of our projects. And again, this is a piece where maybe with your specific questions, you'll reach out to us, but it's just that you're aware of the kind of stage we're looking at these technologies. We want to make sure that when a project begins, we'll be close to the point or at the point where technology can be deployed and commercialized, and you can work directly with the community lab partner to do that. And so part of what we're trying to do with envisAGE is get these technologies at that state, have them be demonstrated and implemented, and also help you with kind of developing your business model as well. That'll set you up as an SME for scale. And for the community lab, from their perspective, we want to make sure that we have technologies that are going to give them a good return on their investment, and that means even their investment of time and their willingness to participate. So we'll have this information up again, but you probably already know this. To apply, you would be going on the envisAGE website, and you'll find information right there. Please do read through the guide for applicants. There are a lot of probably answers to questions there, and a lot of useful information that will help guide you both with the letter of intent and for those who will be invited to submit a full proposal. And just a reminder that the deadline is November 21st to submit that letter of intent. So at this point, I'll go a little bit into the letter of intent itself. So this is just to think through maybe some questions that could come up. So I know in the guide for applicants, for example, we mentioned that any incomplete applications will not be reviewed, but I want to clarify that because you're able to submit either as just an SME or just a community lab, there are certain sections in here that are required to be filled out by one or the other. Obviously, if you're submitting as just a small to medium enterprise, we wouldn't be expecting you to fill out a community lab section. So when we say complete application in that sense, we just mean that you've filled out all of the necessary sections applicable to you. And similarly for the community lab, you would be filling out your sections. And if you're submitting on your own, you wouldn't be able to fill out the SME sections either, but you would be required to fill out those sections explicitly for you, and those where they're highlighted in gray and are meant for the lead applicant. And for joint submissions, you would know how to split that information. And again, as you would have identified a lead applicant, you would know who was responsible for those in gray, and those that are in pink would be for the community lab, those in blue for the SME to fill out. And within that application, again, you'll have a chance, obviously, to find it on the website and review it. There are different word limitations, but we do ask for certain types of information about the innovation, the solution. Obviously, if you're submitting as a community lab, you may have more content in there about your need and the type of innovation you think might be helpful, but you wouldn't have the same level of detail as a joint application or as an SME would on describing a specific type of technology or innovation. So there's information that we're looking for regarding the type of project at a high level that you're intending to deliver on. So you'll see there that there's optional information you can provide on the timeline and types of milestones that you could provide in bullet form. It's optional, but it's very helpful for us to have a sense of the type of project you're looking to deliver and the scope and timeline that you're planning. You can obviously also have space there to talk about your collaborators. And this includes those key collaborators that we mentioned, so the small to medium enterprise and the community lab. Now, obviously, depending on if it's joint or solo, this information can differ. But an important part about any of those, and this includes also a beachhead, is you may at this point not know who the beachheads are, and that's fine. That comes later. But if you are already in a partnership with an identified and publicly identified beachhead, you're welcome to indicate them as a potential collaborator if they have agreed to that or are okay with you doing that. Otherwise, you can also list other potential collaborators outside of that group, and that can include possible subcontractors or other organizations you may want to bring into the project. The one piece to mention is when you do describe your collaborators, if you are describing them but not providing a letter of support, then we will look at them as kind of aspirational partners. If you are able to get a letter of support, indicating a more concrete potential involvement by those collaborators, then you have the ability to include that with your submission. But otherwise, we will look at anyone you list as being aspirational. You'll also see here kind of a table as a forecast. So a detailed budget only comes at the stage of the full proposal. We're not expecting you to submit a full budget here. This just gives us an idea of the kind of potential scope of your project, so you can forecast the types of expenses and the overall total cost that you think you may incur for your participation. Again, for solo applicants, you likely wouldn't be able to do that for any other participants, but for joint applications, it's something that an SME and community lab can try to estimate. And then the final, proper budget would be completed during the full application stage. So it's just useful information for us, but you don't need to get into full details there. So in addition to the eligibility criteria, there are different criteria we'll be looking at when evaluating the letters of intent. So again, I invite you to look at the Appendix 4 in the Guide for Applicants, but we'll be looking at things like the significance of the potential project. Is it addressing an important problem? Is it aligned with one of those 5 themes that we mentioned? You're looking at the technology and innovation to see how the project itself that's being proposed and the technology, how innovative are they? And then obviously the impact and the potential impact of this project on technology. So you can look at a lot more information on evaluation criteria, both at the LOI stage and later on for a full proposal in that appendix in the Guide for Applicants. But if I were to sum it up shortly, we're obviously looking at projects that could have high impact and high potential in this sector. So there's some important reminders about timelines. Like I mentioned earlier, application deadline for the letter of intent is November 21st, 5 p.m. Eastern time. And then we are anticipating by December 5th to contact lead applicants to notify them if they've been invited for a full proposal stage. And you'll obviously be learning more about that, but you can read about it in the Guide for Applicants. For that full proposal stage, just a quick thing I'll mention is if someone submitted as a solo applicant, then there's going to be a matchmaking process that happens to match SMEs and community labs based on the submissions we received at the LOI phase. There will also be matchmaking happening to beachheads. And so we will be looking to connect those applicants that already submitted as a dyad, so an SME and community lab, looking to match them with beachheads. And for those that submitted solo, we'll first match a community lab and SME, and then also match them with a beachhead. And those three stakeholders can work together on the full proposal. The only other piece I'll add is if there was any indication to involve an innovation hub, which you can learn more about online, you would have indicated that in your letter of intent that you may see relevance for their involvement. And so we'll look to do that matchmaking as well. And then there will be a deadline for the full proposal of February 6th of 2024. And by March 19th, we'll look to inform those that were selected of our funding decision. The projects itself, to give you an idea, we're expecting projects to last 12 to 18 months. And there will be a consideration of special exceptions for some projects that are looking to run for 24 months. So just the final slide before getting to the Q&A. What can I do at this stage, depending on who you are? So I'll focus here on the SME and community lab. So obviously, you'll be looking to complete that letter of intent. And as I mentioned, we will be enabling some matchmaking after those that are kind of triaged and selected to be brought into the full application stage. But that doesn't stop you from looking at potential partners now as an SME or a community lab and trying to engage someone to maybe join you on a joint application right at the LOI stage. So certainly encourage that if it's something where you have some leads and possibilities. For if there are any beachheads or Innovation Hub representatives here today, you may know some SMEs or possible community labs that would be a good fit and maybe are working with you or could work with you. So I would say you can encourage them to complete the LOI, and potentially they may be listing you as a collaborator as well. So that's something that you can do. And I spoke about the matchmaking, but just as a reminder, we'll certainly look to match community labs to SMEs if they did a solo letter of intent, but also we will be then matching those pairs to a beachhead. And so what you can expect is we would be sharing with beachheads the kinds of letters of intent that were submitted, and the beachheads will have an opportunity to let us know where they think their expertise would be relevant. Same with innovation hubs if they were indicated. And we'll facilitate meetings with beachheads and innovation hubs to ensure that there is a good match. Another thing we could do for community labs is if a community lab submitted solo, described a particular need, and there are many SMEs that could fit that need, we're happy to facilitate that matchmaking in a number of ways, including potentially facilitating a really kind of rapid and small RFP that the community lab can share to relevant SMEs. And we can help and facilitate that to help with that matchmaking process as well. So we're definitely here to help as the envisAGE team when it comes to the matchmaking piece as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get to the first Q&A section. And I do see that there were a lot of questions that came in.
Yes, thank you, Michael. So we have a lot of questions. Let's start with the first one. So who qualifies as an innovation hub?
Yeah, so for the innovation hubs, these are organizations that have already existed as innovation hubs and were brought into this initiative. So at this point in time, we are not looking for any new innovation hubs. You can learn about 4 existing ones off the AgeWell website or possibly on the envisAGE website as well, with a 5th one coming in. And then in the future, we can evaluate this more. But those innovation hubs do exist at this point.
Thank you. For the next question, are technologies that are already on the market being used by proposed community labs still eligible?
Yes, so these technologies can still be eligible. What we'll be looking at is still seeing through a project your ability to to demonstrate your features, have that kind of independent evaluation by the beachhead partner, and potentially move forward on some aspects of R&D through that validation. So potentially, even though you're in the market, there may be aspects of your solution that can be driven forward through this project and the kind of validation that can happen. But yes, you're still eligible.
Okay, great. Next question. So is the LOI on a rolling basis? When is the next round of LOI will start?
So it's not so much it's on a rolling basis, but we do anticipate another round to happen earlier next year. So I know this year we started in the fall, but potentially in the spring there may be another round. So you'll probably learn about that in the months to come, but there will certainly be other opportunities to submit should you not have time to make it into this deadline.
Great.
And maybe I'll add one more thing there, I think is relevant. If you do submit an LOI and for various reasons, whether eligibility or the evaluation, or maybe even if you make it through that, but we are not able to find a match for you, you are still essentially then kind of part of the envisAGE ecosystem pipeline, and we'll look to work with you to make sure that you have opportunities to participate in future calls. So it's not that if you don't make it to the full proposal stage, that you're kind of not looked at again. We will still look to continue to engage with you and work with you.
Great. Next question. What happens if the technology is lower than TRL 7?
Yeah, so again, for this call and these types of projects, we do require the technology to be at least TRL 7. And so if you're really close there on the boundary, then you may want to reach out to us, and maybe you expect to get there, in the next month or so. So in that kind of scenario, it's probably good just to reach out and have a specific conversation. But if it's really early stage, then we encourage you to continue working on, continue making progress. And then that way we can hopefully get you into a future call, or there are potentially other calls that will happen in the future with the innovation hubs, have special types of projects where maybe you would be eligible even if you're on an earlier TRL, but those are still being developed at this time.
Thank you. And can more than one SME and our community lab apply together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess the way I would answer is at this point, we're looking for a triad for these projects where there would be one community lab, one beachhead, one SME. But what could happen potentially is an organization like a community lab maybe is a partner on the project. Maybe they're brought in another way, but not directly with the same level of responsibility and roles as the key collaborators in the project. So I know that can sometimes be valuable, and similarly maybe for another SME to be involved. I think this is definitely a place where you could benefit by reaching out to us, and the envisAGE email that's provided, and will be in this deck as well, to see how that could be made to work.
Great. So before the next question, I'll go to another one. Can you review the difference between the community lab and a beachhead?
Yeah, sure. So a community lab, you can imagine as an organization, I said, that's serving older adults directly. And that can be, for example, a home care company. It can be a retirement living operator or long-term care operator. It can be a community-based not-for-profit that maybe serves people directly in the community, and different types like that. Whereas a beachhead, it might be an academic center of excellence, maybe based at a university, for example, where they have expertise on aging, and they will have the ability to evaluate the project and mutually agreed upon key performance indicators and outcomes. They can evaluate the implementation. They obviously, as a beachhead, will work closely with the community lab to understand their needs and what's important to them in terms of evaluating the project. But they're almost as an outside third party that can give an impartial evaluation of the project itself.
Thank you. And where can you find the name of those beachheads?
So I believe some of them, I don't know if they're yet listed on the envisAGE website, but I know they were presented at the envisAGE forum. And as we have confirmation on the beachheads, we will be publicizing them. And until we do and get them out there publicly, you will just have to wait. But certainly there are some that I think were announced at the forum already, and I don't know if they're on the website at this point.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for all your questions. I think we have to keep going on the webinar, and there's going to be a second Q&A block at the end.
Yeah, great. And yeah, I'll just follow up that note by saying that we will be able to answer any questions that we don't get to today in another setting. So right now, I'm just going to move on to the other section of this, and this is related to budgets and funding. As I mentioned, at the LOI phase, you are not necessarily going to be submitting detailed budgets, but we do want to make you aware of some aspects of this. So first of all, as was mentioned, envisAGE is a reimbursement-based program. And this program is one where you will be incurring some expenses as a participant, and then submitting those quarterly to envisAGE or to MedTech Plus, and having eligible expenses reimbursed at a particular ratio. And I'll just jump ahead to this slide and then go back. So that ratio of reimbursement will differ depending on the type of organization. The important thing to keep in mind is overall, for the complete eligible expenses for a project, the way this SIF Stream 5 is set up, we are able to reimburse up to 25% in total. So you can imagine 25% of the budget of eligible expenses would come from envisAGE. But the actual reimbursement ratio for each participant will differ. So it can be up to 50% for Beachhead, 20 to 30% for Community Lab, 15 to 25% for the SME. But the actual percentage, you will work that out together at the full proposal stage. So you'll have certainty on what that reimbursement ratio is. It won't just be a range for you. The reason that ranges are listed here is just that the collaborators can work together to settle on a budget and a type of reimbursement ratio that makes sense, but keeping in mind that for the overall project, there's a cap of 25%. So again, the sources of funding here are envisAGE, but there are also other funders that we are bringing to the table. We are constantly working with, and this can be provincial funders, but they can also be funders that you are bringing into play. Maybe you have already been engaging with them and are looking for them to fund similar activities, or maybe you'll do so once you progress through the process of the envisAGE call for innovations. The one thing to keep in mind is there are stacking rules that are applicable for our projects. And so basically, at most, 75% of the total eligible project expenses can come from public sources. So that means when you look at your overall budget, at most, 75% can come from public sources, and that includes envisAGE and other sources of funding. One of these possible types of sources is something you'll hear about more a little bit later in this presentation. When it comes to the development of the budget, obviously the guide for applicants will be very useful, as you'll be able to see there the types of eligible expenses you can include. I don't want to go into all the details of the budget, but you should just be aware that when we're talking about the budget for our submission, we're talking about a budget consisting of the eligible expenses. And so, there may be other types of expenses that are not eligible that are relevant to you. But when we talk about that 75% eligibility and a reimbursement and the budget you submit, we're talking about eligible expenses. And it's important to note that for those that make it through to the full proposal stage, you'll be able to work with envisAGE team members to get help in making sure your budget is created and formatted, put together in the right way. So we'll be there to support you through that. Just a reminder that the expenses that you incur, that you would have planned for in your budget, you will be submitting them quarterly. and there will be requirements that you have proof of payment, that you essentially proof that you've incurred the expenses. So those are submitted, and then there's a reimbursement. So you will submit all the eligible expenses you incurred, and then there'll be a reimbursement of a portion of those expenses based on those ratios that I showed earlier. So there will be more help on creating this budget. There will also be more training and support on eligible expenses and reimbursement that will come later in the process and kind of post the letter of intent stage. So we're certainly there to support you in that, as well as we know this kind of program can be new for some. So I did already go over this, but just a reminder of you'll be kind of working together in that three organization partnership to figure out the ratios within these ranges that will work for you. So you can find example budgets in the guide for applicants. So we put one up here just to show you that in general, at a high level, how projects might look. And there's a range of the size of the project. So here we have an example where it just so happens that each of the Community Lab, SME, and Beachhead are contributing 25% of their own kind of funding. So basically incurring expenses and being able to cover them with dollars that are not public dollars. And that way we can make sure that the project stays under that 75% cap of public funding. Obviously, this is just an example, and it can differ. So for example, an SME maybe is covering a lot more of the costs through a recent round of investment or something like that. And that way, maybe their community lab partner who perhaps didn't have as much funding that isn't public wouldn't have to submit or wouldn't have to expend as much through dollars that aren't public. But the other pieces you'll note here is different levels of reimbursement coming from envisAGE. So here you'll see 20% of funding to the SME coming from envisAGE reimbursement, and 24% for Community Lab, 50% for the Beachhead. So again, these can differ, but you've seen the ranges, and we'll again be there to work with you. Otherwise, you'll also note something that you can read more about in the guide for applicants, and that is a management fee that is a percentage of the overall project size or the budget of the project as well. And that's something that certainly you can learn more about in the guide for applicants, as there's some relevant information for you to look at there. So with that, I'm going to transition to another presenter, but quickly I'll just say that MyTax has been a long-time partner of AgeWell and MedTech Plus, and we've certainly seen with them that ability to collaborate with us effectively and bring in the kinds of resources that many of you could benefit from in envisAGE projects in terms of highly qualified personnel. And the kind of funding that comes in through MyTax will obviously also be helpful for you in terms of budgeting and all of that we mentioned in terms of eligible expenses. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Clement, who I know is going to take you through a little bit more about that, and then we'll get to Q&A at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. And as you mentioned, we've been long-time partner of both MedTech and envisAGE, and it was very natural for us to support this initiative. And the slides went on a little bit fast, but I wanted to start with a story that encompasses how MyTax is already supporting the hashtag world. I don't know if you can go back to the previous slide, because I can't. Yeah, thank you. That basically a story to sum up what we already do. We've been helping this SME from Toronto for a while now, and we've been pairing them with various researchers across a variety of institutions that are listed there. And that allowed us to hire a lot of talent to support them creating their prototypes, which are robots designed to support elderly people to age at home in safety, and generate intellectual property as well as helping them launching their first commercial product. So it really encompasses the earth of what we do, connecting companies to talent, bridging them with the academic world, and helping them achieve a lot of impact. So yes, that's an image that sum up as well. We are a federal organization. So this is a map of all the active link we currently have. So we have, of course, our own network of advisor. We have more than 120 advisors located all around Canada. But we also have this huge network of professors and companies. And something that is interesting to note, and I've looked at the poll that was sent to you earlier, and more than half of you are actually startup and SMEs, and 80% of the partner we're working with are startups and SMEs. So it's really fits within our mandate. And about numbers as well, if the slides want to switch. Yeah, so as you can see, we've been in a rapid growth in the past year. We're now serving more than 12,000 partners, 300,000 students, and we have injected more than $1.5 billion in the innovation ecosystem. So we definitely have the resources to support your program. And as I mentioned earlier, so we do a lot of networking, but what's the result of this networking? What's the result of all this public money we're injecting in the ecosystem? And the main impact is economical growth. So we've done a survey, actually StatCan did a survey for us. And basically, I don't want to dig into too much detail, but the companies that were using MyTax against their competitor that were not have seen a much better increase in revenue, sales, but also, and it's especially important for a government funder, labor productivity and quality of employment, so wages and salaries. And a bit more diving into the details and like how we build up with envisAGE, how we can help you. So my tax model, for those who don't know us, is always the same, and it's very flexible. So there is always an academic partner, which means at least one professor. So there is always at least one industrial partner, but that can be also a community lab, that can be an NFP. And with those, there is one student. And it always comes from, we have the need of the private partner, we have the expertise of the profs of the lab, and we have the student actually using this knowledge to tackle the challenge. And it's a bit like Legos. So our program is what's called internship units. So it's one student for 4 months, 4 to 6 months. And a project can be scaled up to any size. It can have multiple partners. That's especially true for envisAGE, where we want to have both an SME and a community lab. So we can have multiple private partners, we can have multiple profs, multiple universities, and multiple students. And we found all fields and all TRL, which means that whatever is the need for innovation for your project, we can pretty much cover it. It will fit under one of our program. And earlier there was a question about what if my technology is not of an high enough TRL? Well, we can help you maybe scale up this technology with our program, with other medtech program, for example, so you can be ready for the next call of envisAGE. That's pretty much my message here, is that we've been supporting EdgeTech for a very long time with our partner at EdgeWell and MedTech Plus, and we have all the network and the capacity to help support all of those new projects. And of course, the usual thank you to our funding partners, the main one being ICED, but also all the provinces of Canada.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Clement. And yeah, hopefully many of you here today are able to take advantage of all that MyTex offers, even in these projects, but also beyond. So just a reminder before we get to final Q&A, again, the deadline is coming up, so please do read through the guide for applicants so you're familiar with that, and be mindful of the deadline. See if you can find partners or collaborators that are and can be helpful for proposal. And do feel free to reach out to us with any questions in case they were not answered here. So with that, I'll go back to any remaining Q&A for the balance of our time.
Yes, thank you both of you. So we have a question regarding the LOI for a community lab that submits a loan and are willing to be matched with the company. How can they fill the financial forecast and the project description, both of these sections requiring kind of a better idea of the technology?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we understand that to some extent you'll be limited in what you can do there, but the kinds of things you might be able to provide, even if you don't know the technology, is, for example, identifying the kinds of internal resources you may have to assign to a project in order for it to happen. So kind of irrespective of the type of technology, whether it's a project manager or something like that. There's some pieces you'll be able to provide to give us a sense, but I understand that maybe your need or your issue could enable a range of types of technologies where you won't have all the information on the scope of it, but you can do your best to provide what you do know. And in terms of the project description, again, it's a high-level description, so you could still talk about the way you might bring the technology into your setting or your population, early on. So for example, you may do some pre-implementation work that you want to describe, or engagement with your clients, as appropriate. You may be able to describe some of that, irrespective of the technology, and give us a sense of how you plan to get the technology, any kind of technology, into your organization or into the hands of your users. There's still at a high level a sense you can give us of that, even without knowing the specific type of technology. So yes, you may not be able to describe detailed steps you would take with assessing or looking at the integration of a particular type of technology, but there's still a high level description you could probably provide of what you would do when it comes to bringing this kind of technology or some kind of technology to address your need into your organization or into the setting that you're serving.
Thank you. And to answer two questions at the same time, can you give us an update on the SAFE in envisAGE?
Yeah, so I know some of you have been part of sessions or events in the past where this has come up. So in terms of the SAFE, one of the things I can say is that this isn't a mandatory part of the program. So the SAFE is something that might be made available to some small to medium enterprises, but this will only be explored after projects are approved. So it isn't something that you will need to necessarily worry about in advance, but it could be something that is offered to you and discussed with you after project approval, and ultimately it will be the choice of the SME on whether they want to participate under the kinds of terms that will be presented.
And I'll add to that the SAFE is mostly about reduction of management fee and also adding in-kind value of a venture team coming to your company and helping you go to the next step. Okay. So thank you for that. Good, next question. Can you clarify the obligations of an SME?
Sorry, the question is to clarify the obligations of an SME?
For the LOI, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a pretty broad question, but I would say when you look through the LOI, there's a color coding to know which parts you have to fill in. If you mean obligations,
the financial obligation, I'm sorry.
Financial obligations, yeah. So for financial obligations, well, you will need to have capacity to incur expenses, within each quarter, and then submit them for reimbursement, knowing that there's a period of time where review and reimbursement happens. You can see more about the timelines in the guide for applicants, but as an SME, you would need to have that ability to hold essentially those expenses until you're reimbursed some portion of them. And then other pieces around that is you will obviously need to be able to deliver on the budget that you have proposed. You may be counting on other sources of funding. So we'll likely work with you to understand what those other sources of funding might be, to know, what kind of risk could be involved and things like that. And then otherwise, there are probably specific or detailed questions you may have about expenses that we'll be able to help you with as they come up. But I'm not sure if that answers your full question. Let me know if not.
Okay. Thank you. So for next question, we're an SME talking with a senior level organization in the US. Do they qualify as a community lab, or it should be in Canada?
Yeah, so they should be based in Canada, and there's more detail in the eligibility criteria in terms of organizations that are set up in multiple countries. But for this, we'd be looking for activities to take place in Canada, and the community lab to have a base in Canada as well.
Thank you. And how does an organization become beachhead?
So I think there's a place on the website where you would express your interest or intent in becoming a beachhead, and then we have team members who would reach out to those organizations that are interested in joining as a beachhead. So I would welcome you to go to the website and go to relevant beachhead section and be familiar with it, and then reach out through the website to express your interest, and then we will take it from there.
Thank you. Does a clinic or a hospital count as a community lab?
So I think the way we've been looking right now, there isn't an explicit exclusion of a hospital, but we would probably want to learn a little bit more about what you have in mind, which you mean. I think it potentially could still qualify for a clinic, yes, but even for the hospital. So I would just, with your specific situation, I would invite you to send us an email and we can have a conversation.
Thank you. So, and can a SME submit more than one LOI per technology? And what's the percentage of project cost is the SME expected to contribute?
So can you submit more than one LOI? I mean, yeah, technically there isn't something stopping you from doing that, but you should be aware that any organization can only be funded in one project at a time. So if you're submitting something, for example, with maybe multiple proposals with multiple community labs, just be aware that only one can be funded. So you'd have to decide where to focus that as well. And sorry, the second part of that question was how much should the SME be contributing? Yeah, so I mean, you've seen there earlier in the slides, there's a range of reimbursement for your costs. So technically, the balance of the expense is covered in another way. Now, that could come through another funding program. Maybe you have some of your staff are actually being brought on board through MyTax, for example, or maybe there's a provincial funder that's contributing to you for this project. So that's fine. But you should also just be mindful of that stacking rule for eligible expenses, and that it should be 75% at most of your expenses are coming from public funding. And in that case, you would just at least have that amount that is coming from the SME or through private sources.
Thank you. And can envisAGE help with finding the stacking funds to offset the SME costs?
We are working with various partners, such as MyTax and various provincial organizations, to bring them on board and kind of create alignment in how we might share or review potential projects. That's something we're doing at an ecosystem level, and it may be able to benefit you. Now, whether we can do that for a specific project, that you'll probably more likely benefit when we have those possibilities in place. But certainly it's something you can just reach out to let us know about. But we also encourage you to be looking for these other sources as well.
Thank you. And how many community lab can an SME have in the same project? Is multiple community lab allowed in different provinces, for example?
Yeah, so I guess it's similar to the question that came up before. So at this point for the LOI, and even for a full proposal, we're looking to have one lead, if you want to call it that, community lab and SME. There may be ways that other partners that could consider themselves community labs could be a part of a project, but they may not end up being an ultimate recipient. And again, this is something you can read more about. Ultimately, in a project as an ultimate recipient, you will have one SME, one community lab, one beachhead, and maybe an innovation hub if they're interested. But these ultimate recipients, which are the ones that are being reimbursed for their expenses, they may have other collaborators in the project that are participating in different ways. If they are participating in a way where they're incurring some costs, that would be for you to work out with them as maybe as a subcontractor, for example. But in the project and in the legal agreement that will be signed later, the contract as an ultimate recipient agreement, that's done, if you make it through all the way for a full proposal and the project is approved, we would have only one of each of those. So I hope that answers your question, but in essence, we wouldn't at this point have, two community labs as ultimate recipients in the same project.
Thank you. And maybe one more question or two. So could you elaborate on the matchmaking process?
Yeah. So I'll start with the most basic one. What we'll do is we're going to have letters of intent come in where small to medium enterprises describe their technology and innovation. For the solo ones, we'll have community labs that are describing their needs and what they'd like to see and how they'd like to see those needs addressed. Those groups are where we have one pool for matchmaking. And so we'll see whether type of need can be addressed by what the SME submitted and vice versa. And then we will look for ways to facilitate that matchmaking. So we'll share with the community lab the types of SMEs and the types of proposals that were submitted that could align with their need. If they already have choices there, we can proceed from that point. And as I mentioned, if they prefer to have some kind of a really rapid and mini RFP where a couple of SMEs can submit more information to help them with that decision, and then we'll facilitate that as well. Once that match is done, obviously it may not be done for everyone, but like I said, you'll stay in the pipeline for future calls. But once that's done, then matchmaking with the beachheads happen, and there we'll share with the beachheads already those dyads that submitted jointly and those that were matched in the matchmaking process. We'll share those with beachheads, and they'll be able to indicate where they feel their expertise is a good fit. They may look to be introduced to a number of potential projects. We'll facilitate those meetings and introductions, and at the end, we'll make sure that the best desired matches are made to be able to work on a full proposal.
Thank you. And two questions at the same time. Is there a maximum amount that can be requested from envisAGE?
So there is a general kind of amount, a capped amount that each type of participant or each type of ultimate recipient may be eligible for. There is some flexibility within that. So, you can think of it in the range of up to $100,000 for an SME, a community lab, and a beachhead, each individually. So each up to 100,000. Keeping in mind that that's the amount that you'd be reimbursed in total. So you would obviously have incurred, greater expenses than that. So let's say your reimbursement ratio is 50%, and you would have spent 200,000 to get 50,000 to get 100,000 in reimbursement if you're under a 50% reimbursement ratio, and so on. So the actual limits that they're probably going to vary depending on what's submitted, and we'll obviously work with you to understand what you're looking to propose.
Thank you. I see that time is over.
Yeah, so I'll just say there. Obviously, I know there are a lot more questions, which is great. We're going to record all these questions, and we will be looking for ways to share answers to these questions with you. And obviously, this webinar is recorded. At some point, we'll look to have like an FAQ and other information that you can look at so that everyone can benefit from the answers to these questions. And of course, please do feel free to reach out to us with your specific questions as well. From now until the LOI deadline and then even beyond that as well. So thanks so much for taking part, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.